The stage lurched to a violent halt outside the ramshackle depot in Silver Peak, Nevada, sending Catherine Garrett sprawling against the wooden bench, her carpetbag tumbling to the floor with all the grace of a drunken miner. It was August of 1878, and the scorching desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town that looked more like a collection of weathered dreams than an actual settlement. Catherine smoothed her dust-covered navy traveling dress and peered through the window at the cluster of sun-bleached buildings that constituted her new home, wondering for the 1,000th time if leaving Boston had been the worst decision of her 22-year-old life. The driver yanked open the door, extending a gnarled hand that Catherine accepted gratefully. As her boots touched the packed earth of Silver Peak's Main Street, she became immediately aware of the curious stares from every direction. A woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but one dressed in Eastern finery with skin that had clearly never seen a day of honest labor was practically a carnival attraction in a place like this. Miss Garrett. A thin woman in a faded calico dress approached, her weathered face breaking into a welcoming smile. "I'm Martha Henley. Your uncle wrote to say you'd be arriving today." Catherine felt relief flood through her. "Yes, thank you. I apologize for my appearance. The journey was rather more arduous than I anticipated." Martha laughed, a warm sound that immediately put Catherine at ease. "Honey, you look better than most folks do after 3 days on that bone-rattling contraption. Come on, let me help you with your trunk. Your uncle's place is just down the way." As they walked along the wooden sidewalk, Catherine took in her surroundings with growing apprehension. Silver Peak was nothing like the tidy, ordered streets of Boston. Men in dusty clothing lounged outside the saloon even at this early hour, and the constant neighing and stamping of horses from the livery stable made her heart race with an anxiety she'd carried since childhood. Her uncle's general store occupied a corner lot with a faded sign that read "Garrett's Provisions" in peeling letters. The bell above the door jangled as they entered, and a barrel-chested man with graying hair and kind eyes looked up from behind the counter. "Catherine." Uncle Thomas came around to embrace her, and she was surprised by the genuine warmth in his greeting. They'd never met in person, their relationship consisting entirely of the occasional letter over the years. "You're the very image of your mother, God rest her soul. Come, let me show you the living quarters upstairs. Martha, thank you for fetching her." "My pleasure, Thomas. Catherine, I'll see you at church on Sunday." Martha departed with a friendly wave, leaving Catherine alone with her only living relative. The rooms above the store were sparse but clean, consisting of a small parlor, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a washroom that seemed positively luxurious compared to what Catherine had expected. Uncle Thomas had clearly made an effort to prepare for her arrival, with fresh linens on the bed in what would be her room and even a small vase of wildflowers on the dresser. "I know it's not what you're accustomed to," Thomas said, a note of apology in his voice. "But it's honest and it's safe, and you're welcome here for as long as you need to stay." Catherine turned to him, tears suddenly threatening. "Uncle Thomas, I don't know how to thank you. After Father's death and the debts, I had nowhere else to turn. The creditors took everything, even Mother's jewelry. I sold what remained just to afford the stage fare." Thomas squeezed her shoulder gently. "Family takes care of family, Catherine. Your mother was my favorite sister, and I failed her by coming out west and losing touch. I won't fail you. Now, I imagine you'd like to rest and freshen up. We'll have supper around 6, and I'll tell you about the work in the store. Nothing too difficult, just minding the counter and keeping the books. You always did have a head for figures," your mother wrote. After Thomas left her alone, Catherine sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment to simply breathe. Boston seemed a lifetime away already, with its society teas and calling cards, and the scandal that had erupted when her father's embezzlement came to light after his sudden death. She'd lost not just her home and possessions, but her reputation and every friend she'd thought she had. No respectable man would have her now, and her prospects for employment in the city had been non-existent. Silver Peak might be rough and uncivilized, but at least here no one knew her shame. The following days passed in a blur of learning the store's inventory, meeting the townspeople, and adjusting to the relentless heat that seemed to seep into her very bones. Catherine discovered she had a knack for the work, her natural efficiency and pleasant manner winning over even the most skeptical customers who'd initially viewed her Eastern background with suspicion. What she couldn't adjust to, however, were the horses. They were everywhere in Silver Peak, an inescapable part of daily life. Every time a customer tied their mount to the hitching post outside the store, Catherine's heart would begin to pound. The sound of hooves on the street made her freeze. Even seeing them from a distance triggered a visceral fear she couldn't control. It had been this way since she was 6 years old, when she'd witnessed a carriage accident in Boston that killed a young woman. The panicked horses, the screaming, the blood on the cobblestones, all of it had burned into her mind with traumatic clarity. Her parents had never forced her to confront the fear, wealthy enough to ensure she could always avoid direct contact with the animals. But here in the West, such avoidance was rapidly proving impossible. On her 8th day in Silver Peak, Catherine was restocking shelves when the bell above the door chimed. She glanced up and felt her breath catch in her throat. The man who entered was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the standard cowboy attire of denim trousers, a chambray shirt, and a leather vest, but somehow on him the rough clothing looked almost elegant. His face was all strong lines and sharp angles, with gray eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent an unexpected shiver down Catherine's spine. "Thomas around?" "He's in the back checking the latest shipment," Catherine replied, proud that her voice came out steady. "May I help you with something?" The cowboy studied her with open curiosity. "You must be Thomas's niece from back east. Heard you'd arrived. Name's Garrett Turner." Catherine blinked in surprise. "Garrett? That's my surname as well." His mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "Different family line, I'd wager. It's a common enough name. I run a horse ranch about 5 miles north of town. Supply most of the mounts for the mining operations and help break horses for the cavalry when they need it." Of course he worked with horses. Catherine felt her stomach tighten. "I'm Catherine Garrett. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mr. Turner." "Just Garrett's fine. Everyone calls me that to avoid confusion with my father, George." He moved to the counter where Catherine stood. "I need to order some feed and tack supplies. Got a list here." As Catherine took the paper from his hand, their fingers brushed briefly. The contact was electric and she nearly dropped the list. Garrett's eyes met hers, and for a moment something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. Thomas emerged from the back room, breaking the spell. "Garrett, good to see you. I see you've met Catherine. Just now." Garrett's attention shifted to Thomas, but Catherine felt his awareness of her like a physical presence. "Brought my list for next week's delivery." "Excellent, excellent. Catherine, would you mind totaling that up? The prices are in the ledger under livestock supplies." Catherine bent to the task, grateful for something to focus on besides the unsettling presence of Garrett Turner. As the two men discussed ranching matters and town gossip, she found herself sneaking glances at the cowboy. There was something about the way he moved with an unconscious grace and confidence that she found utterly magnetic. When she'd finished the calculations and written up the order, Garrett paid in cash and tipped his hat to them both. "Much obliged. Thomas, Catherine." His eyes lingered on her for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Pleasure meeting you, Miss Garrett." After he left, Thomas chuckled. "That boy's one of the finest horsemen in Nevada. Got away with animals that's almost supernatural. He's done well for himself, too, built up that ranch from nothing after his father passed. Good man, honest and hardworking. A bit of a loner, though, doesn't socialize much in town." Catherine murmured something noncommittal, trying to ignore the fact that her heart was still racing. She had no business being attracted to anyone, much less a man whose entire livelihood revolved around the very animals that terrified her. That night, however, she dreamed of gray eyes and calloused hands. Over the following weeks, Garrett became a regular presence in the store. His ranch required frequent supplies, and Catherine began to suspect he was finding more excuses to come to town than strictly necessary. Their conversation started as polite exchanges and gradually deepened into something more substantial. She learned that he was 26, had been running the ranch alone since his father died 2 years ago, and had a reputation for being able to gentle the most difficult horses. He, in turn, seemed genuinely interested in her stories of Boston, though she carefully edited out the darker details of her departure. She told him about the theaters and concerts, the magnificent architecture, the ocean glimpsed from the harbor. He listened with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. It was during one of these conversations, about 3 weeks after their first meeting, that everything changed. Catherine was organizing a delivery that had just arrived when she heard the unmistakable sound of a horse's distressed whinny followed by shouts from the street. She looked out the window to see a man struggling with a rearing horse, the animal clearly panicked about something. Without thinking, Catherine ran to the door to see if anyone was hurt. The scene outside was chaos. The horse, a large bay stallion, had broken free from the hitching post and was rearing and thrashing, scattering people in all directions. Catherine stood frozen in the doorway, her childhood terror slamming into her with the force of a physical blow. Her vision began to narrow, her breathing coming in short gasps. Then suddenly Garrett was there, appearing seemingly from nowhere. He moved toward the panicked horse with calm, deliberate steps, speaking in a low voice Catherine couldn't quite make out. The crowd fell silent, watching as he approached the terrified animal. His hands were loose at his sides, his posture relaxed but alert. Catherine watched, transfixed, as Garrett came within a few feet of the horse. He stopped, continuing to speak in that low, soothing voice. The horse's ears swiveled toward him, still dancing nervously but no longer rearing. Garrett extended one hand slowly, palm up, and waited. It seemed like an eternity, but was probably only a minute before the horse took a tentative step toward him. Garrett remained perfectly still. The horse stretched out its neck, nostrils flaring as it caught his scent, and then, incredibly, lowered its head and allowed Garrett to stroke its muzzle. The tension drained from the crowd. The horse's owner, a sheepish-looking miner, hurried forward. "Much obliged, Garrett. Don't know what spooked him. Snake probably, or maybe a rattler's warning he heard that we didn't." Garrett handed over the reins. "Check his hooves tonight, make sure he didn't stone himself in the panic." As the crowd dispersed, Garrett turned and his eyes found Catherine immediately. He crossed to where she still stood in the doorway and his expression shifted to concern. "You all right? You're white as a sheet." Catherine tried to speak and found her throat had closed up entirely. She shook her head mutely. Garrett took her gently by the elbow and guided her back into the store, calling out to Thomas, who appeared from the back. She had a fright. Might want to get her some water. Thomas hurried off, and Garrett led Catherine to a chair near the counter. Breathe slow and deep. You're safe. Nothing's going to hurt you. His voice had the same quality it had carried when he was calming the horse, and Catherine found herself responding to it, her breathing gradually slowing. Thomas appeared with a glass of water, which she sipped gratefully. "I'm sorry," she finally managed. "That was foolish of me." "Wasn't foolish at all," Garrett said firmly. "That horse could have hurt someone. You had every right to be scared." Catherine met his eyes and saw only kindness there, no judgment. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I'm terrified of horses." The admission hung in the air. Thomas looked surprised, but Garrett's expression didn't change except for a slight softening around his eyes. Catherine continued, needing to explain now that she'd started. "When I was a child, I saw a terrible accident. A carriage team bolted and a woman was killed. I've been afraid ever since. In Boston, I could avoid them, but here." She trailed off helplessly. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. Then he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face into something almost boyish. "Then we'll start with gentle walks together." Catherine blinked. "I beg your pardon." "If you want to get over your fear, I can help you. We'll start slow, no pressure. Just walks at first, nowhere near the horses. Then maybe watching them from a distance. Work our way up gradual-like." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But only if you want to. No one's going to force you to do anything you're not comfortable with." Catherine looked at him, at the sincerity in his face, and felt something shift in her chest. This man, who made his living with the very animals she feared, was offering to help her face that fear with patience and gentleness. It was possibly the kindest thing anyone had ever offered her. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like that very much." Garrett's smile widened. "Good. How about tomorrow evening around 6 when the heat breaks? I'll come by and we'll take a walk up toward the hills. No horses, just conversation and fresh air." "That sounds lovely." After Garrett left, Thomas regarded his niece with shrewd eyes. "That young man's taken quite a shine to you." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "He's just being kind." "Garrett Turner doesn't do anything just to be kind." "He's thoughtful, yes, but he doesn't waste his time on things that don't matter to him." Thomas paused. "I think you matter to him, Catherine. Question is, does he matter to you?" Catherine thought about those gray eyes, that gentle voice, the strength tempered with compassion she'd witnessed. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I think he does." True to his word, Garrett appeared at the store the following evening just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the distant mountains. Catherine had changed into a simpler dress, more suitable for walking, and her heart was pounding as they set off together down the dusty street. They walked in comfortable silence at first, heading away from the center of town toward the scrubby hills that ringed Silver Peak. The air was still warm but no longer oppressive, and a slight breeze carried the scent of sage and creosote. "Tell me about the accident," Garrett said after a while, "if you're comfortable talking about it." Catherine found that she was comfortable, more so than she'd ever been discussing it before. It was winter in Boston. The streets were icy and the carriage team slipped. The driver lost control and they bolted. A woman was crossing the street and she didn't see them in time. "I was with my mother and we saw the whole thing." She swallowed hard. "The horses couldn't stop. They were just as terrified as everyone else, but all I could see was these massive animals out of control and the blood in that poor woman." Garrett's hand found hers, warm and solid. "That's a hard thing for anyone to witness, much less a child. My parents never made me go near horses after that. They accommodated my fear rather than helping me face it. I suppose they thought they were protecting me, but it just meant I never learned to understand that what happened wasn't really about the horses themselves. You're right about that. Garrett's thumb stroked gently across her knuckles, the touch sending pleasant shivers through her. Horses are prey animals. When they panic, they're running on pure instinct. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They're trying to escape what they perceive as danger. Understanding that doesn't make them less powerful or less potentially dangerous, but it does help put things in perspective. They walked for nearly an hour, talking about everything and nothing. Garrett told her about growing up on the ranch, about the long days and hard work, but also about the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. Catherine spoke more freely about her life in Boston than she had to anyone, though she still held back the details of her father's crimes and the social ruin that had followed. As the sun set in a spectacular display of orange and purple, painting the desert in shades of fire, Garrett walked her back to the store. At the door, he paused. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "I'd like that." "Good." He hesitated, then added, "You did well today, Catherine." "I know that took courage." "We didn't go anywhere near any horses," she pointed out. "No, but you decided to try. That's where courage starts." After he left, Catherine climbed the stairs to her room feeling lighter than she had in months. Something was beginning between her and Garrett Turner, something that both thrilled and terrified her. But unlike her fear of horses, this was a fear she wanted to face head-on. Their evening walks became a daily ritual. Garrett was true to his word, keeping them well away from horses at first, simply letting Catherine become comfortable in his presence and in the wild landscape surrounding Silver Peak. He taught her to identify desert plants, pointing out which ones held water and which could treat various ailments. She learned to read the signs of the land, the subtle shifts in color that indicated different types of terrain. On the fifth evening, Garrett took her to a small rise that overlooked his ranch in the distance. It was far enough away that the horses were merely dots, but Catherine could see the corrals and the ranch house, a sturdy structure built of wood and stone. "My father built that house with his own hands," Garrett said quietly. "Took him 2 years. He was determined to create something lasting, something he could pass down to his sons." A shadow crossed his face. "He only had me, though, and he worried I wouldn't want the life he'd chosen. Tried to send me back east for school when I was 16. But you didn't go. Went for 1 semester. Hated every minute of it. The buildings pressing in, the noise, the crowds, all those people living on top of each other. I felt like I couldn't breathe." He glanced at her. "No offense to where you're from," Catherine laughed. "None taken. I think I'm beginning to understand what you mean. There's a freedom here I never experienced in Boston. Everything there is so structured, so defined by rules and expectations." "You miss it?" She considered the question carefully. "I miss certain things. The culture, the beauty of the buildings, the access to books and music. But the life I lived there, the person I was expected to be." She trailed off, shaking her head. "No, I don't miss that." Garrett studied her intently. "Who were you expected to be? A proper society lady? Marry well, manage a household, host elegant parties, and never have an original thought in my head." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "I was reasonably good at it, the performance of it all, but it always felt like wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. And now I'm discovering who I actually am beneath the costume." She met his eyes. "It's frightening but also exhilarating." Something shifted in Garrett's expression, an intensity that made Catherine's breath catch. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her bun behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "I think who you actually are is pretty extraordinary," he said softly. Catherine felt like she might stop breathing altogether. They were standing so close she could see flecks of green in his gray eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. When he leaned down, his intention clear, she didn't even think about pulling away. The kiss was gentle, questioning, his lips soft against hers. Catherine's eyes fluttered closed and she leaned into it, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. She could feel his heart pounding as hard as her own. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the first day I saw you in the store," he admitted. "Why didn't you? Didn't think a refined lady from Boston would want anything to do with a rough cowboy covered in horse hair and dust." Catherine laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "This refined lady from Boston has spent the last 3 weeks thinking about nothing but said rough cowboy." Garrett kissed her again, deeper this time, and Catherine felt something settle into place inside her, as though a piece she hadn't known was missing had finally found its home. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened in both intimacy and understanding. Garrett was endlessly patient, never pushing Catherine beyond her comfort level but always gently encouraging her to stretch her boundaries. 2 weeks after their first kiss, he suggested they visit the ranch during the day when he had work to do. "You can stay up at the house," he assured her. "The horses are all in the corrals or the pasture, nowhere near the building. But I'd like you to see where I live, what my daily life looks like." Catherine agreed, though her heart hammered nervously as Garrett's wagon pulled up the long drive to his ranch. The house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with a wide porch and windows that caught the morning light. Everything was neat and well-maintained, speaking to Garrett's attention to detail and pride in his property. Inside, the house was surprisingly comfortable. The furniture was simple but well-made, and Catherine noticed small touches that suggested Garrett had taken care to make it a home rather than just a place to sleep. Books lined shelves in the main room, and colorful woven blankets draped over the chairs. "My mother made those blankets before she died," Garrett said, noticing Catherine's attention. "She was half Paiute, taught me a lot about respecting the land and the animals. My father met her when he first came out west, and according to both of them, it was love at first sight." He smiled sadly. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her in a matter of days." "I'm so sorry." Catherine touched his arm gently. "You must miss her terribly, every day." "But I try to honor her memory by living the way she taught me, treating everything with respect and understanding my place in the larger picture." He gestured toward the window. "She would have liked you. She always said the measure of a person is whether they are willing to face their fears rather than hide from them." From the safety of the house, Catherine watched Garrett work in the corrals. He moved among the horses with a confidence and grace that was mesmerizing. She saw him work with a young colt, patiently teaching it to accept a halter, his movements slow and deliberate, his voice too low to hear but clearly soothing based on the colt's reactions. As the day wore on, Catherine found herself increasingly fascinated rather than frightened. From this distance, with Garrett's presence as a mediating factor, the horses were beautiful creatures. She could appreciate their power and elegance without the overwhelming terror. When Garrett came in for lunch, dusty and tired but smiling, Catherine had made sandwiches from the supplies he kept in his kitchen. "You didn't have to do that," he said, but his pleasure was obvious. "I wanted to. Besides, I enjoyed watching you work. You're incredible with them, Garrett." He ducked his head, almost embarrassed by the compliment. "It's just patience and respect. Horses want to trust you, but you have to earn it. You can't force it or rush it." "Is that your philosophy for everything?" Catherine asked, her tone teasing but with an undercurrent of seriousness. Garrett met her eyes. For anything that matters, yes. After they ate, Garrett took Catherine's hand. Want to try something? No pressure, and we stop the second you want to. What did you have in mind? Come out to the porch with me. They sat on the wide porch steps, still a good 50 yards from the nearest corral. Garrett pointed to a horse grazing in the nearer pasture, a lovely gray mare with a gentle disposition evident even from a distance. That's Dove. She's the sweetest horse I've ever known. Nothing spooks her, and she's got the patience of a saint. I use her to teach children to ride. Catherine watched the mare, her heart rate elevated but not panicking. She's beautiful, she is. And she's too far away to be any threat at all, but you're looking at her, really looking. That's progress, Catherine. They sat there for a long time, Catherine watching the horses in the distance, Garrett watching Catherine. His hand never left hers, a steady anchor keeping her grounded. I want to beat this, Catherine said suddenly. This fear, I want to overcome it completely. You will, Garrett said with absolute confidence. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You just don't know it yet. How can you say that? I'm afraid of horses, for heaven's sake. What kind of strength is that? The kind that brought you all the way from Boston to start a new life in a place completely foreign to everything you knew. The kind that gets up every morning and faces a world full of the very thing that terrifies you. The kind that chose to try to overcome that fear instead of just living with it. He turned her face toward his gently. Strength isn't not being afraid, Catherine. It's being afraid and doing it anyway. Catherine kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and growing love into the gesture. When they separated, she whispered, I think I'm falling in love with you. Garrett's eyes lit up like she'd given him the greatest gift imaginable. Good. Because I've been in love with you since you looked up from that counter and I saw the intelligence and determination in your eyes. I just didn't want to scare you off by saying so too soon. You couldn't scare me off. Well, you could if you tried to put me on a horse right now. She was half joking, but Garrett's expression turned serious. I would never do that. When and if you ever sit on a horse, it'll be because you decided you were ready, not because I or anyone else pushed you into it. That evening, as Garrett drove Catherine back to town in his wagon, she found herself imagining a future here with him in this wild, beautiful place so different from everything she'd known. It seemed impossible, and yet more real than anything she'd experienced in Boston. Thomas noticed the change in his niece immediately. She'd always been pleasant and efficient, but now there was a glow about her, a happiness that radiated from within. He approved wholeheartedly of Garrett Turner, who he'd always regarded as one of the finest young men in the territory, and he could see that the cowboy was just as smitten with Catherine as she was with him. You planning to marry that girl? Thomas asked Garrett bluntly one afternoon when the cowboy stopped by the store. Garrett didn't even pretend to misunderstand. If she'll have me, yes. But I want to wait until she's ready, until she's sure this is the life she wants. It's not an easy life, Thomas, ranching out here. It's hard work and long hours, and sometimes it's dangerous. I need to know she understands what she'd be signing up for. That girl's tougher than she looks. She's been through things back east, though she doesn't talk about it much. Whatever drove her out here, it wasn't just a yearning for adventure. Thomas fixed Garrett with a meaningful look. She's running from something, though I don't know what. You might want to find out before you propose. Garrett nodded slowly. He'd suspected there was more to Catherine's story than she'd told him, but he'd been following his own advice and not pushing, letting her reveal things in her own time. But Thomas was right. If they were going to build a future together, it needed to be built on complete honesty. That evening, instead of their usual walk, Garrett suggested they ride out in his wagon to a spot he wanted to show Catherine. They traveled for about 20 minutes, climbing into the hills until they reached a plateau that overlooked the entire valley. The view was breathtaking, the setting sun painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Garrett had brought a blanket and a basket of food, and they sat watching the sunset in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, he said, "Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She tensed slightly. "All right. What really brought you to Silver Peak? I know you said your father died and there were debts, but there's more to it than that. I can feel it." Catherine was quiet for so long that Garrett thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began to speak. "My father was an accountant for several prominent Boston families. He had an excellent reputation, was trusted implicitly. What no one knew was that he was stealing from his clients, had been for years. He was a gambler, you see, and he'd gotten in deep with some very dangerous people. He was taking money to cover his debts." Her hands twisted together in her lap. "He had a heart attack and died before anyone discovered what he'd done. The creditors went through his papers and found everything. Within a week, the story was all over Boston society." Garrett reached for her hand, but she pulled away, needing to finish. "The families he stole from demanded restitution. Everything we had was seized. The house, the furniture, my mother's jewelry, even my own belongings. But it wasn't enough to cover what he'd taken. Some of those families lost fortunes because of him." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I was engaged, did I mention that? To a man from a very good family. He broke it off immediately, said he couldn't be associated with the scandal. All my friends turned their backs on me. I couldn't get work because who would hire the daughter of a thief and an embezzler, Catherine? No, you need to know all of it. You need to know what you'd be getting if you tie yourself to me. I'm ruined, Garrett, completely ruined by association with my father's crimes. If anyone from Boston found out where I was, the scandal would follow me here. It could damage your reputation, hurt your business." Garrett waited until he was sure she was finished, then pulled her firmly into his arms despite her resistance. "Listen to me. I don't give a damn about any of that. You are not your father. You didn't commit any crimes. You're a victim of his choices as much as anyone. But the association is meaningless out here. Catherine, do you know how many people in the West are running from something back east? Failed businesses, broken relationships, crimes they did or didn't commit. Out here, you're judged on who you are now, not who you were or what your family did. You've proven yourself in Silver Peak. People like you, they respect the work you do at the store and the person you've shown yourself to be. You say that now, but if it became known, then we deal with it together." He pulled back to look at her tear-stained face. "I love you, Catherine Garrett. Not some perfect ideal, but you, with all your fears and your past and your complications. And if you'll have me, I want to marry you and build a life with you right here in Nevada, where the past doesn't matter and the future is what we make it." Catherine stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You want to marry me, even knowing all of this?" "Especially knowing all of this, because it means you trust me enough to tell me the truth even though you were afraid it would drive me away." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither is my love for you. Now, I don't have a ring yet, was planning to wait a bit longer to make it official, but I'm asking you right now, Catherine, will you marry me?" The answer burst out of her with more certainty than she'd felt about anything in her entire life. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." Garrett kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Catherine felt the last of the walls she'd built around her heart come crumbling down. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to make you happy," he promised. "I'm going to spend every day of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on a rough cowboy from Nevada." I already know I won't regret it. You've given me more in a few weeks than I had in 22 years in Boston. You've given me hope and acceptance and a reason to face my fears. You've given me love, Garrett, real love without conditions or expectations. How could I ever regret that? They stayed on the plateau until full dark, making plans and dreaming aloud about their future. Garrett wanted to wait until spring to get married, to give Catherine time to be absolutely certain and to give him time to make some improvements to the ranch house. Catherine agreed, though part of her wanted to marry him immediately. Besides, Garrett said with a mischievous grin, that gives us 6 months for you to get comfortable enough with horses that you can at least pet Dove without panicking. Can't have a rancher's wife who's terrified of the animals we make our living from. That's a tall order, Catherine said, but she was smiling. But I'll try. For you, I'll try. Over the following months, Garrett was true to his patient, methodical approach. He gradually brought Catherine closer to the horses, always at her pace, never pushing. They spent countless hours at the ranch, with Catherine observing from varying distances as Garrett worked. In October, 3 months after their engagement, Catherine managed to stand at the fence of the corral while Garrett worked with a horse inside. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't run. She stayed, watching, breathing through her fear. In November, on a cool morning with the first hints of winter in the air, Garrett brought Dove to the fence where Catherine stood. The mare's gentle eyes regarded Catherine with calm interest. "Just breathe," Garrett said softly. "She can sense your fear, but she's not going to hurt you. Dove has never hurt anyone in her life." Catherine's hand was shaking as she slowly, so slowly, reached out toward the mare. Dove stood perfectly still, as if she understood the momentousness of what was happening. Catherine's fingertips brushed the mare's soft nose and she gasped at the contact. "That's it," Garrett encouraged. "You're doing so well, Catherine." Catherine managed to stroke Dove's nose for perhaps 10 seconds before the panic became too much and she had to step back. But she'd done it. She'd actually touched a horse for the first time since she was 6 years old. Garrett swept her into his arms, spinning her around. "You did it. I'm so proud of you." Catherine was laughing and crying at the same time. "I did it. I can't believe I actually did it. I can. I always knew you could." He set her down but kept his arms around her. "You're the bravest person I know." By December, Catherine could stand beside Dove while Garrett groomed her, could even help brush the mare's shoulder while Garrett kept a steadying hand on her back. It was slow progress, but it was real progress, and Catherine felt a fierce pride in each small victory. The town had fully accepted Catherine by now, and news of her engagement to Garrett had been met with genuine happiness from the community. Martha Henley had taken Catherine under her wing, teaching her practical skills for ranch life like cooking for large groups during harvest and roundup, preserving food, and basic medical care for both humans and animals. Thomas was delighted by the upcoming marriage, though he was frank about his worries about running the store without Catherine's help. "Don't worry," Catherine assured him. "Garrett and I have discussed it. I'll still help out several days a week, at least until you can find someone permanent. The ranch isn't so far that I can't come to town regularly." "You're going to make a fine rancher's wife," Thomas said, patting her hand affectionately. "Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become, Catherine. I know I am." Christmas came, and with it a light dusting of snow that transformed Silver Peak into something almost magical. Garrett gave Catherine a beautiful silver locket engraved with wildflowers, and inside he'd placed a small photograph of the two of them that had been taken by the traveling photographer who'd passed through town in November. Catherine gave Garrett a hand-tooled leather vest she'd made herself with Martha's help, and his delight in the gift warmed her more than any fire could. They stood on the porch of the store on Christmas evening, watching the snow fall and wrapped in each other's arms against the cold. 6 more months, Garrett murmured into her hair, and then you'll be Catherine Turner. I can't wait, she replied honestly. Though I have to admit, part of me wonders if I'll actually be ready to ride a horse by then. Doesn't matter if you are or aren't. That's not what makes you ready to be my wife. Being my wife is about partnership and love and building a life together. The horses are just part of the picture, not the whole thing. He pulled back to look at her. But I have faith in you. By spring, I think you'll surprise yourself. Garrett was right. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Catherine's confidence grew by leaps and bounds. In March, she was able to walk Dove around the corral on a lead rope, with Garrett by her side but not touching the horse himself. The mare's gentle nature and Catherine's growing understanding of horse behavior combined to make the experience more thrilling than terrifying. She trusts you, Garrett said, watching Catherine lead Dove in a careful circle. Look at how relaxed she is. She knows you're not going to hurt her, that you're taking care of her. I think I trust her too, Catherine admitted. Not all horses, not yet, but Dove specifically, yes, I trust her. That's more than enough. Trust has to be earned and built, whether with horses or people. In April, with their wedding just weeks away, Garrett asked Catherine if she wanted to try sitting on Dove. They were at the ranch, and the spring day was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming sage. Just sitting, Garrett emphasized. No saddle, no walking, just letting you get used to the feeling of being on her back, and only if you want to. Catherine took a deep breath, steadying herself. She thought about the terrified 6-year-old who'd watched that terrible accident, about the woman who'd arrived in Silver Peak 9 months ago, unable to even look at a horse without panicking, about all the small steps and victories that had brought her to this moment. I want to try. Garrett brought Dove to the mounting block, speaking softly to the mare the entire time. He helped Catherine climb onto the block, then held Dove's halter firmly. Take your time. There's no rush. Catherine stood on the block, level with Dove's back, her heart hammering. The mare stood perfectly still, patient and calm. Catherine reached out, placing both hands on Dove's back, feeling the warmth and the gentle rise and fall of the horse's breathing. That's good, Garrett encouraged. Whenever you're ready. Catherine closed her eyes, said a quick prayer, and swung her leg over Dove's back. For one moment she was sitting on a horse, actually sitting on a horse's back, and the world didn't end. She didn't fall. Dove didn't bolt or rear. Everything was still and calm and okay. Then the panic hit, swift and overwhelming, and Catherine scrambled off the other side, landing hard in the dirt. Garrett was there immediately, helping her up, checking that she wasn't hurt. You did it, he said, pride shining in his eyes. Catherine, you actually sat on a horse. Even if it was only for a few seconds, you did it. Catherine was shaking but also exhilarated. I did, didn't I? I sat on Dove. You sure did. And next time you'll sit a little longer, and the time after that maybe we'll walk a few steps. There's no deadline, no pressure. You're doing this at exactly the right pace. But Catherine had tasted victory now, and she wanted more. Over the next 2 weeks she practiced every day, staying on Dove's back a little longer each time. Garrett walked beside her, one hand on the mare's halter, his presence a constant reassurance. 5 days before their wedding, Catherine rode Dove all the way around the corral. No saddle, just her sitting on the gentle mare's back with Garrett walking beside them, but it was real riding. When they completed the circuit, Catherine was laughing with pure joy. I'm riding a horse. Garrett, I'm actually riding a horse. He helped her down and caught her as she threw her arms around his neck. You are amazing, do you know that? Absolutely amazing. I couldn't have done it without you. Your patience, your faith in me, your willingness to let me go at my own pace. You gave me this, Garrett. You gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost. You gave it to yourself. I just walked beside you while you did the hard work." He kissed her softly. "And speaking of walking beside you, in 5 days I get to do it officially for the rest of our lives." The wedding took place on a perfect May morning in the small church that served Silver Peak and the surrounding ranches. Catherine wore a simple but elegant dress in pale blue that Martha had helped her make, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Garrett wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable, though his eyes never left Catherine from the moment she appeared at the back of the church on Uncle Thomas's arm. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by what seemed like the entire town. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett kissed Catherine with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward at the ranch was lively, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Catherine was passed from partner to partner in the country dances, laughing and breathless, feeling more joy than she'd ever imagined possible. As the sun set and guests began to depart, Garrett claimed his wife for one final dance. They swayed together under the emerging stars, alone in their own world despite the people still milling about. "Happy?" Garrett asked softly. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," Catherine replied honestly. "I feel like I've finally found where I belong. You belong with me. Here on this ranch in this life we're building together." He paused, then added with a slight grin, "Though I have one more surprise for you." "What kind of surprise?" Garrett led her to the barn where Dove stood in her stall, but the mare wasn't alone. Beside her stood a young filly, all long legs and curious eyes, her coat a soft dappled gray. "This is Dove's daughter, born 3 months ago. I've been gentling her, and I thought if you wanted she could be yours. You could help train her, work with her as she grows. She doesn't have a name yet. I thought you might want to choose one." Catherine stared at the filly, tears welling in her eyes. To go from being terrified of horses to being offered one of her own was a journey she could never have imagined when she stepped off that stage 9 months ago. "She's beautiful. Can I go closer?" "She's yours. You can do whatever you want." Catherine approached the stall slowly, and the filly regarded her with bright, intelligent eyes. She extended her hand, and the filly sniffed it cautiously before allowing Catherine to stroke her soft nose. "Hope," Catherine said suddenly. "I want to name her Hope, because that's what you gave me, Garrett. Hope for a future I never thought I could have." Garrett wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as they both watched the filly. "Hope is a perfect name. And I promise you, Garrett Turner, I'm going to spend every day making sure you never regret taking a chance on me in this life." Catherine turned in his arms to face him. "I could never regret it. You saw past my fears and my flaws to who I really was underneath. You loved me when I couldn't even love myself. You gave me courage and acceptance and a home. How could I regret any of that?" That night, in the house that was now hers as much as his, Garrett and Catherine began their married life together with a joy and passion that surprised them both. They lay awake afterward, talking and dreaming about their future, about the children they hoped to have, about the ranch they would build together, about growing old side by side in this wild, beautiful place. The first year of marriage brought both challenges and triumphs. Catherine had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of work that varied with the seasons. It was harder than anything she'd done in Boston, physically demanding in ways she'd never experienced. But it was also deeply satisfying, creating something tangible with her own hands. She continued to work with Hope, and under both Garrett's and her own gentle training, The filly grew into a sweet-natured young horse that followed Catherine around like a devoted dog. Watching Hope grow and learn helped Catherine understand horses in a way all the explanations in the world never could have. By summer, Catherine was confident enough to ride Dove around the ranch property, though she still preferred having Garrett nearby. By fall, she was helping move cattle from one pasture to another, sitting securely in the saddle and even enjoying the experience. "You've come so far," Garrett told her one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Sometimes I can hardly believe you're the same woman who couldn't stand near a hitching post without panicking." "I'm not the same woman," Catherine said. "That woman died somewhere between Boston and Silver Peak, or maybe she was reborn. I'm not entirely sure which." In December, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with excited anticipation tinged with the normal anxieties of first-time parents. Garrett became even more protective, worrying about Catherine overexerting herself, while Catherine insisted she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal work. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time," she reminded him when he tried to stop her from helping with the evening feeding. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." Their son was born in late August of 1880, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. They named him Daniel Thomas Turner, after Garrett's father and Catherine's uncle, and from the moment Catherine held him, she understood a love so fierce and all-encompassing that it frightened her with its intensity. Garrett was a devoted father, handling the baby with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough cowboy exterior, but was completely in character for the man Catherine knew him to be. He would walk the floor with Daniel for hours when the baby was fussy, singing soft songs in a mixture of English and Paiute that his own mother had sung to him. Thomas, now in his 60s and thinking about retirement, doted on his great-nephew with shameless favoritism. He'd found a widow from a neighboring ranch to help run the store, but he still insisted on Catherine and the baby visiting regularly so he could spoil the child properly. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under Garrett's expert management and Catherine's keen head for business and numbers. They expanded gradually, hiring a hand to help with the increased workload, a young man named Samuel who proved reliable and hardworking. When Daniel was 2, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace Ellen, was born in 1883, arriving just as spring was breaking over the Nevada mountains. She had Catherine's dark hair and delicate features, but Garrett's determined personality was evident from her first days. "We're building a family," Catherine said one evening when Grace was a few weeks old. She and Garrett were sitting on the porch, watching Daniel play in the yard while Grace slept in her mother's arms. "A real family, the kind I always wanted but never thought I'd have." "We're building a legacy," Garrett corrected gently. "Something that will outlast us, that will carry on long after we're gone. These children, and hopefully more to come, they're the future of this ranch and this land." More children did come. A second son, Matthew, arrived in 1885, followed by another daughter, Rose, in 1887. The house that had once seemed spacious now rang with the sounds of children, and Garrett added on 2 more bedrooms to accommodate their growing family. Catherine had become an accomplished horsewoman, comfortable in the saddle and even helping to gentle and train the young horses they raised. The terrified woman who'd arrived in Silver Peak nearly a decade before seemed like a different person entirely, though Catherine never forgot the journey that had brought her to this place. Hope, now a fully mature horse, was Catherine's constant companion on rides around the property. The bond between woman and horse was deep and intuitive, and Garrett often joked that Hope understood Catherine better than he did. When Daniel turned 10, Garrett began teaching him the serious business of ranching, taking him along on cattle drives and showing him how to read the land and the animals. Catherine watched her son learning from his father, seeing the pride and love in both their faces, and felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Grace showed an early aptitude for horses that rivaled her father's, and by age 7, she was helping train the young foals with a patience and intuition that amazed everyone. Matthew was quieter, more scholarly, and Catherine made sure he had access to books and learning even in their remote location. Rose, the baby, was a perfect blend of all her siblings, adventurous and curious and affectionate by turns. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1889, having lived to see his great-niece build a successful life and a beautiful family. The entire town mourned him, and Catherine felt the loss keenly. But she took comfort in knowing he'd died happy, surrounded by people who loved him and proud of what she'd accomplished. The 1890s brought both prosperity and challenges. A harsh winter in 1892 killed several head of cattle, and a fire in 1894 destroyed one of the barns, though thankfully no animals or people were hurt. Through it all, Catherine and Garrett faced everything together, their partnership strengthened by years of shared joys and sorrows. They celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary with a large party, inviting friends and neighbors from across the territory. As Catherine danced with Garrett under the stars, just as they had on their wedding night, she marveled at how full her life had become. "Do you ever regret leaving Boston?" Garrett asked her. It was a question he'd never asked before in all their years together. Catherine didn't even have to think about her answer. "Not for a single moment. Everything I lost there led me to everything I gained here. You, our children, this life, this home. Boston gave me nothing but rules and restrictions and shame. Nevada gave me freedom and purpose and love. How could I ever regret that? I love you, Garrett Turner. More today than the day I married you, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That's not mathematically possible," Catherine teased, but her eyes were bright with tears. "Because I don't think it's possible to love someone more than I love you right now." As the years continued to pass, the Turner Ranch became one of the most respected horse operations in Nevada. Garrett's reputation for producing quality, well-trained horses spread, and they received orders from as far away as California and Colorado. Catherine managed the business side of the operation with the same skill she'd once applied to her uncle's store, ensuring they remained profitable even in difficult economic times. Their children grew into capable, confident young adults. Daniel took over more of the daily ranch operations as Garrett's hair went gray at his temples, showing the same patience and skill with animals that his father possessed. Grace married a neighboring rancher's son when she was 20, a young man who loved horses as much as she did, and they established their own small ranch with help from both families. Matthew surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, taking a position at the small school that had been established in Silver Peak as the town grew. He brought books home constantly, and the ranch house's library expanded to fill an entire room. Rose, ever the romantic, fell in love with a cavalry officer passing through on his way to a posting in California, and after a whirlwind courtship, married him and moved west. Through it all, Catherine and Garrett remained each other's anchors, the love between them as fresh and vibrant as it had been in those early days of evening walks and gentle encouragement. They faced the new century together, welcoming grandchildren with the same joy they'd welcomed their own children, watching their family grow and spread across the West. On a spring morning in 1904, Catherine stood in the same corral where Garrett had once helped her overcome her fear of horses. Hope, now an elderly mare, had passed away the year before, but her descendants filled the pastures, each one carrying the gentle temperament that had made their grandmother so special. Garrett came up behind Catherine, wrapping his arms around her waist in a gesture as familiar as breathing. They were both in their 50s now, hair going gray, faces weathered by sun and wind, but to Catherine, Garrett was still the handsome cowboy who'd offered to take gentle walks with a terrified woman. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. "About fear," Catherine said slowly, "and courage, and how sometimes the things we're most afraid of lead us to exactly where we need to be. Still no regrets, not a single one." She turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me everything, Garrett. A home, a family, a purpose, and most importantly, the courage to face my fears. You taught me that being afraid doesn't make you weak, that real strength is trying anyway." "We gave each other those things," Garrett corrected. "You think I was brave before I met you? I was hiding out here, avoiding real connection because I was afraid of losing someone else I loved. You taught me that love is worth the risk always. You gave me a family and a reason to build something that would last. We saved each other, Catherine." As they stood together in the morning light, surrounded by the ranch they'd built and the life they'd created, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her from a terrified woman stepping off a stage in a dusty Nevada town to a confident rancher's wife and mother surrounded by love and purpose. She'd arrived in Silver Peak running from scandal and shame, afraid of horses and uncertain of her future. She'd found a patient cowboy who saw past her fears to the strong woman underneath, who'd taken her hand and walked beside her as she found her courage. Together they'd built not just a ranch, but a legacy of love and determination that would continue through their children and grandchildren for generations to come. The fear that had once controlled Catherine's life had been transformed into strength, and the horses that had terrified her had become beloved partners in the life she'd created. And it had all started with a simple admission, a gentle smile, and the promise of gentle walks together. As Catherine and Garrett headed back toward the house, where their family was gathering for Sunday dinner, she paused to look back at the corrals and pastures, at the mountains rising in the distance, at the vast Nevada sky stretching overhead. This was home, truly and completely. Not the home she'd been born to, but the home she'd chosen, built with her own hands and heart alongside the man who'd shown her what love really meant. "Ready?" Garrett asked, extending his hand. Catherine took it without hesitation, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture perfected by years of practice. "Always," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Together, they walked toward the house filled with laughter and love, toward the family and life they'd created together, toward a future as bright and boundless as the western sky. And in that moment, Garrett Turner, formerly Catherine Garrett of Boston, knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. The fear that had once defined her was now just a distant memory, transformed by patience and love into strength and courage. The woman who'd been terrified of horses now ran a ranch full of them, raised a family surrounded by them, and couldn't imagine her life any other way. And every time she saw a nervous horse or a frightened person, she remembered Garrett's words from that long-ago day in the general store, words that had changed her life. "Then we'll start with gentle walks together." Because Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the smallest steps, taken with someone who believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself. And sometimes the life you never imagined is the one you were meant to live all along.